It was the most anticipated debut in a decade. Yet within the first 48 hours, the atmosphere inside the Yamaha garage shifted from celebration to a chilling realization. For years, the name Toprak Razgatlioglu was synonymous with a specific brand of mechanical defiance. In the world of production-based racing, he was the undisputed sovereign, a rider who could make a superbike perform maneuvers that defied the laws of physics. His move to the Pramac Yamaha project for the 2026 season was marketed as the final piece of the puzzle for a Japanese manufacturer desperate to reclaim its lost glory. The paddock was electric with the prospect of the Stoppie King finally bringing his aggressive, late-breaking brilliance to the prototype stage. Fans and analysts alike speculated that his arrival, coupled with Yamaha's radical shift toward a V4 engine configuration, would be the silver bullet to stop the European dominance. However, as the first official sessions of 2026 got underway, the narrative began to fracture. The transition wasn't just a change of scenery, it was a collision of two incompatible philosophies. While the world expected a seamless takeover, those standing behind the plexiglass of the Yamaha pit box saw something far more concerning. The stopwatch doesn't lie, and it was whispering a difficult truth. The very skills that made Toprak a legend in WorldSBK were now becoming his greatest liabilities. The aura of invincibility that followed him from the production paddock seemed to evaporate as he struggled to find a rhythm on a machine that demanded surgical precision over brute force. It wasn't just a matter of learning a new bike. It was the beginning of a psychological and technical battle that would soon push the Turkish champion to his absolute limit. Behind the scenes, the technical data revealed a staggering disconnect between the rider's instinct and the unforgiving reality of prototype rubber. In the high-stakes environment of MotoGP, the front tire is the most sacred component of the motorcycle, and for Toprak, it has become his primary antagonist. Throughout his career, he perfected a style of braking that involved lifting the rear wheel and putting immense, violent pressure on the front end, a technique that the Pirelli tires of the Superbike world accepted and even rewarded. But the Michelin tires used in the Premier class operate within a much narrower window of temperature and pressure. According to paddock insiders, the telemetry from Toprak's early runs showed that he was overloading the front casing, pushing the tire beyond its structural design. Every time he attempted one of his signature deep braking maneuvers, the bike responded with a violent vibration known as chatter, a physical rejection of his input. Engineers were seen huddled over monitors, pointing at the steep spikes in the data that indicated the rider was trying to force the bike into a cornering shape it simply couldn't hold. The conflict was visible to the naked eye at the end of the long straights. Where other riders were smooth and clinical, Toprak's Yamaha looked unsettled, a nervous beast under a master who didn't speak its language. This wasn't a minor setup issue that could be solved with a click of suspension damping. It was a fundamental clash of DNA. The harder he pushed to find the limits he once knew, the further the bike pushed back, creating a cycle of frustration that began to weigh heavily on the rider's confidence. The realization was starting to settle in. To go fast in this world, he would have to delete the very reflexes that had defined his identity as a racer for over 10 years. While the public focused on the rider, a silent storm was brewing inside the garage regarding Yamaha's unfinished mechanical revolution. The timing of Toprak's arrival coincided with the most significant engineering pivot in Yamaha's modern history, the development of the V4 engine. For decades, the M1 was defined by the smoothness of the inline-4, but in 2026, the pursuit of top-end speed led them down a new, more aggressive path. This meant that Toprak wasn't just learning a new category. He was essentially a lead development rider for a prototype that was still in its infancy. Reports suggested that the power delivery of the new V4 was peaky and lacked the refined electronics of the established Ducati and Aprilia machines. This created a perfect storm of difficulty. In the adjacent garage, teammate Jack Miller, a veteran of multiple manufacturers, was able to use his deep well of MotoGP experience to mask the bike's shortcomings. Miller's ability to manage the sensitive electronics and maintain a high corner speed highlighted the gap in Toprak's current understanding. While Miller was seen calmly discussing tire degradation with his crew chief, Toprak's debriefs were rumored to be much more intense, filled with gestures indicating a lack of feeling from the chassis. The tension was palpable. The team had invested millions into this project, and their star signing was struggling to outpace a teammate who many considered to be past his prime. The internal politics were shifting, as some began to wonder if Yamaha had built a bike that was too Italian in its soul for a rider who was still fundamentally Japanese in his approach. The weight of being the savior of a brand was starting to show, and the technical hurdles of the unfinished V4 were only making the mountain steeper to climb. The humid air of Bararam became the backdrop for a moment that forced the entire paddock to pause and reassess the Turkish star's trajectory. The Bararam sprint race in May 2026 was supposed to be the venue where Toprak finally made his breakthrough. The heavy braking zones of the Thai circuit played right into his perceived strengths, and the expectations from his massive global fanbase were reaching a fever pitch. However, as the lights went out, it became clear that the WSBK heart was leading him into a dangerous confrontation with the laws of prototype physics. Eyewitnesses near the final turn described a rider who was clearly overriding, trying to make up for a lack of mid-corner speed by lunging on the brakes with desperate intensity. In a moment that silenced the grandstands, the bike finally snapped. It wasn't a slow slide or a predictable error. It was a sudden, violent loss of control that sent the Yamaha tumbling into the gravel trap. While the rider was fortunately able to walk away from the high-speed incident, the damage to his championship campaign and his ego was severe. In the immediate aftermath, the paddock whispers turned into a roar. Some believed he was simply trying too hard to prove he belonged, while others suggested the bike was fundamentally rejecting his inputs. The crash was a physical manifestation of the internal struggle we had been tracking since the preseason. It was no longer a theoretical debate about style, it was a documented failure of technique. The technical staff at Pramac were seen looking at the wreckage with a sense of grim resignation. They knew that until Toprak could find a way to harmonize with the Michelin front tire and the V4's torque map, these types of setbacks would continue to haunt his debut season. For a man who had forgotten what it felt like to lose, the reality of the mid-pack was starting to erode the very foundation of his competitive spirit. Success is a powerful drug, and Toprak Razgatlioglu had been at the highest possible high for the last 3 years in the Superbike world. Coming into the MotoGP paddock, he expected to be a protagonist, but by the midpoint of the 2026 season, he found himself fighting for 10th and 12th place, positions he hadn't seen since his early teenage years. The psychological toll was becoming evident in his body language. During the post-race media scrums, the once vibrant and playful rider seemed guarded and weary. It was during an emotional interview following a difficult qualifying session in Sepang that he finally dropped the mask. He admitted to the assembled press that he was still riding like it's a superbike, and that the bike was essentially fighting him every step of the way. This wasn't just a technical admission. It was a cry of frustration from a champion who realized his greatest weapon had been taken away from him. The demotivation that insiders had been whispering about was now a public reality. In a sport where thousandths of a second are found in the mind as much as the machine, a rider who doubts his own style is a rider who is already at a disadvantage. He spoke about the emptiness of crossing the line and seeing a 2-digit number on the pit board, a stark contrast to the podium celebrations he had grown accustomed to. The weight of the Turkish nation's expectations, combined with the pressure from Yamaha's corporate board, was creating a fracture in his legendary composure. He wasn't just fighting the other 21 riders on the grid. He was in a brutal daily war with his own muscle memory and the haunting fear that he might have made the wrong choice. In the midst of the turmoil, a familiar and stern voice emerged from the shadows to deliver a reality check that would change the course of Toprak's season. Kenan Sofuoglu, the mastermind behind Toprak's career and a legend in his own right, has never been known for sugarcoating the truth. As the 2026 season threatened to spiral into a complete disaster, Sofuoglu made a rare and pointed appearance in the MotoGP paddock. According to those close to the camp, the intervention was brutal but necessary. Sofuoglu reportedly sat Toprak down and stripped away all the talk of world titles and podium missions. He told his protégé that the pursuit of the Ducatis and the Aprilias was a distraction, a poison that was causing him to override and crash. The instruction was clear: forget the front of the pack and focus entirely on being the best Yamaha rider. This meant a direct internal war with Fabio Quartararo and Jack Miller. This shift in perspective was designed to lower the stakes and allow Toprak to rebuild his technique from the ground up, without the crushing pressure of needing to win immediately. Sofuoglu's public statements reflected this new, humbler approach, stating that the team was not yet on par with the European manufacturers and that 2026 was strictly a year of education. This Sofuoglu reset was a pivotal moment in the narrative. It signaled to the paddock that Toprak was no longer trying to be the messiah, he was willing to be a student. This change in philosophy started to reflect in the garage atmosphere, which became less about fixing the bike and more about fixing the rider. However, the question remained: could a rider of Toprak's caliber truly suppress his winning instincts long enough to learn the subtle, clinical art of MotoGP racing? As the season progressed, the hospitality units became hubs of intense speculation regarding whether the most hyped transfer in history was destined for failure. The MotoGP paddock is a cruel environment, and once a rider shows a sign of weakness, the rumors begin to circulate like sharks. By the late spring of 2026, the dominant conversation among team principals and journalists was whether Toprak had waited too long to make the jump. At 29 years old, he was significantly older than most rookies, and many wondered if his neural pathways were too hardwired for the production-based bikes. Comparisons were being drawn to other Superbike legends who had crossed the divide with mixed results. The names of Troy Bayliss, James Toseland, and Ben Spies were frequently mentioned in the press center, often accompanied by the suggestion that Toprak might be following their trajectory. A flash of brilliance followed by a slow descent into mid-pack anonymity. Even more damaging were the reports coming out of the Yamaha factory team, where Fabio Quartararo was reportedly studying Toprak's telemetry with a sense of bafflement. Rumors suggested that Quartararo found Toprak's data unusable, as the braking points and lean angles were so far outside the norm for the M1 that they offered no help to the development of the bike. This created an internal tension within the Yamaha hierarchy. Was Toprak a development asset or a developmental distraction? While Pramac remained publicly supportive, the whispers suggested that if results didn't improve by the end of the European leg, the team might begin looking at younger, purer prototype talent for 2027. The clock was ticking, and the grace period afforded to the Superbike King was rapidly expiring. As the sun sets on the early rounds of the season, the Turkish star stands at a crossroads that will define the remainder of his professional life. The resolution of the 2026 story for Toprak Razgatlioglu is not one of immediate triumph, but of grueling, quiet labor. He has finally accepted the year of suffering. The grand declarations of title contention have been replaced by a focus on marginal gains. A few tenths found in a smoother throttle application here, a slightly more disciplined braking marker there. The documentary footage of the recent tests in Jerez shows a rider who spends more time staring at computer screens than doing wheelies for the fans. He is a student again, meticulously unlearning a decade of dominance to survive in a world that doesn't care about his past. The road to 2027 is paved with the boring work of professional racing, tire management, electronic mapping, and aerodynamic positioning. He is no longer the Stoppie King in the eyes of the paddock. He is a prototype in development, just like the V4 engine beneath him. The final thought for the 2026 season is one of cautious curiosity. Toprak has shown he has the humility to admit his faults, which is the first step toward greatness. But in a sport that moves at 350 kilometers per hour, time is a luxury he doesn't have. He knows what must be done, and he is willing to do the work, but the haunting question remains. Can he truly delete his soul as a Superbike racer before the MotoGP world moves on without him? The answer lies in the data in the garage and in the quiet moments before the visor goes down. The king is dead. Now we wait to see if the rider can be born.